Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. College campus unrest over the war in Gaza. The latest on negotiating a ceasefire and release of Israeli and American hostages. Which side will give up the most? Week 3 of the criminal trial of former President Donald Trump. What will be the implications on the upcoming presidential election? Plus, the U.S. Supreme Court will decide on social issues that will potentially impact us all. Perspective on all of this with Dr. Eric Claville and his award-winning Claville Report. That's next on Another View, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Lots to unpack about national and international politics, and we'll have perspective from Dr. Eric Claville and his award-winning Claville Report. But first, today we honor a community leader on the peninsula, and she's also a dear friend. Golden Hill passed away this week, the wife of Charlie Hill, a friend of Another View who frequently joins us to talk about prostate cancer and its impact on African American men. Golden was a gem in the healthcare space. She and Charlie founded the Community Free Clinic in Southeast Newport News, serving residents' healthcare needs free of charge. Now the clinic is known as the Charlie W. and Golden Bethune-Hill Community Health Clinic, with the same mission of providing healthcare for all, regardless of ability to pay. Our Lisa Godley has a tribute.
Golden Bethune-Hill lived a life committed to serving others. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from North Carolina A&T State University, which was followed by a master's in nursing administration from VCU. She would go on to complete the Nursing Executives Fellowship Program at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Golden started her career at Montefiore Hospital and Medical Center in New York. She later returned to Newport News as the Director of Nursing at Riverside before leaving to serve as Vice President of Nursing Administration and Patient Care Services at St. Clair's in New Jersey. Golden would remain at St. Clair's for several years before moving to Centra Health in Lynchburg. In 2005, Golden returned to Riverside as the Executive Vice President of Health Systems and ultimately serving as President and Chief Executive of the Riverside Regional Medical Center. Golden retired in 2010 after serving 50 years in the healthcare industry. Even after retirement, her work to make her community a better place continued when she, along with her husband, Charlie Hill, founded the Community Free Clinic of Newport News, a facility created to provide medical and dental care for uninsured peninsula residents. Golden would volunteer as the clinic's executive director for nearly 6 years. Golden co-founded the Hampton Roads Prostate Health Forum, which promotes prostate cancer education and awareness. She would also chair the forum's Community Advisory Board, providing early detection events throughout Hampton Roads. Golden was asked about her community service work after she and Charlie were both nominated and won the 2012 Daily Press Citizen of the Year.
We do things that we think need to be done, and we don't wait for it to happen. We see it and we jump out and say, here we are, what can we do to help? I always say to children that I talk with and anyone else who's thinking about a dream.
Her list of accolades include being recognized for outstanding contributions in healthcare by national, state, and local organizations. Her work in the community involved serving on numerous boards, including LifeNet, the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities Peninsula Chapter, Access Partnership, Police Foundation, and Future of Hampton Roads, an organization committed to fostering collaboration, innovation, and appreciation within the Hampton Roads region. Golden was also an ordained deacon at Carver Memorial Presbyterian Church in Newport News and a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She is survived by her husband Charlie and a host of family members and friends. She will truly be missed.
And Golden and Charlie are very dear friends of myself and my husband, Maxie. And on behalf of the staff of Another View, we extend our sincere condolences to Charlie, his family, and to all who love and cherish Golden. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dr. Eric Claville is an award-winning political and legal analyst. He makes sense of the things happening in our world and how they impact our everyday lives. And we welcome him back to Another View. We missed you, my brother. How are you?
I miss you too, Barbara. So glad to be, always great to be here with you on Another View.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. So much going on. It's almost hard to figure out where to start, right? But let's start with the unrest on college campuses nationwide, because it's over the war in Gaza. UCLA and police clashed just this morning.
Yes.
The president just came out and said, violence has no place. What exactly is going on these various campuses?
Well, Barbara, this is our 1960s, our 1980s. Of course, the student protests that turned tragic on a lot of campuses in the 1960s due to the unrest and protests over the Vietnam War, the draft, also civil rights. It was a lot going on in the 60s. The 1980s, the protests over apartheid in South Africa that took place on a lot of campuses, urging companies to divest themselves from South Africa because they engaged in apartheid, which was their form of Jim Crow. And legalized segregation. So now this is our time. And what's happening is that now you have the war in Gaza, the Middle East, that is taking center stage now and taking precedence over all of the issues affecting students and really the young people in that particular space. And what's happening on college campuses is that, just like all of us, we're seeing the actual destruction of an entire group of people, in the Middle East and what's called the Gaza Strip. And of course, that's part of the country of Israel, in which others call Palestine. And then also it borders Egypt, and it's also now, and then it bumps against the Mediterranean. So when you take a look at where they are and the history of those individuals in that part of the world, which goes back thousands and thousands before Christ, right? You now come to a point where you're having really all-out war. And I've talked about this several years ago and how I believe that would actually help tip us across the scale of a world conflict, more specifically World War III. But what students are protesting is the day after day, you're seeing over, and really right now it's over 25,000, probably more. But right now you're seeing day after day, women and children being killed that had no part of the unfortunate massacre that took place with Hamas that invaded Israel. And actually, of course, we saw
Israel's retaliating.
Israel retaliating, but they're retaliating in a way that is unconscionable to a lot, not just here in the States, but the UN, the world. As a matter of fact, the UN on a couple of occasions have basically raised resolutions in which were, of course, defeated, and they've called for a ceasefire. Even the Pope himself said, listen, we need a ceasefire. There are UN and world organizations, what's called NGOs, that have also said the humanitarian issue that's over there is an absolute disaster, and it is reaching a point. It has reached a point to where now countries need to step in and say enough is enough. The only issue that we have with anything being a ceasefire, or we're actually the only variable that's stopping it from being a ceasefire, is really the United States saying, Netanyahu, you have to stop, because we're aiding Israel 110% for weapons and so forth. And what's happening is that they're just, unfortunately, the White House and they're just being very ineffective in communicating those desires of really the world and a lot of people in the United States to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel to say, this is not our way. This is not our way. So right now, the numbers of about 25 to 2,800 persons in Israel that were captured and or kidnapped or killed during the invasion at that time. And you have about 25 to 28,000 people that were killed in Gaza. I mean, you have, for the most part, you have individuals in Gaza throwing rocks and sticks, and you have Israel shooting rockets and guided missiles, and it's just not an equal fight. So the protests are individuals that are not saying we're against Israel being anti-Semitic. They say we're against the innocent killing. Many people believe that countries have the right to defend themselves, but there's a way to do it. All-out destruction and war is not our way anymore. Same thing that's happening in Ukraine, with Vladimir Putin and, of course, what's going on there. And the split between the House of Congress on how to support both Ukraine and also Israel. So you see the factions that are fighting on each side and how that plays out. Barbara, I think one thing that's really, I think, guiding a lot of misinformation is the mismessaging that we see with the protests. Once again, protests are not saying they're anti-Semitic. And to say that you're against Israel doing this doesn't mean that you're against Israel. Doesn't mean that you're anti-Semitic. So you're just against the way that they're going out, defending themselves. And what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing is that they're pulling the playbook off of the shelf and using this unfortunate incident of the attack upon them to now extinguish and take over that strip of land, which has always been what they
battled
anyway.
from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So when because there are Jewish students who are also participating in some of the protests across the country in terms of the college campuses. So when they position it as pro-Palestinian, then there are some who then say, well, now you're being anti-Semitic.
Right. And it's the same thing, and I've talked about this, when someone, and I'll use race and racism for an example. When you have someone that is black and white, and you have someone that says, no, I don't agree with you, they say, oh, you're being racist, people run to their corners because those are the fighting words. So you're saying, so now you're defending an misinformed statement as opposed to the issue or the substance of it. And also make no mistake about it, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel, is by no means a Boy Scout. He's been in indictment. I mean, he's the Donald Trump of that country. Hands down. As a matter of fact, he decimated the government, which is why a lot of individuals in their country are calling for him to step down. But he decimated them by removing non-loyalists from the government when he was under indictment and also being threatened to be removed from office. And with that, he's also no second coming of Jesus Christ either. I mean, he's just not a good individual as relates to relations with the United States. A lot of the domestic relations in his own country. But again, it's just one of those unfortunate situations where misinformation, and the White House can really do a lot. I believe the White House can really do a lot more in really communicating the right message across the board, and a lot of news outlets as well. And when I say news outlets, I mean the entertainment outlets, not the public broadcast, not the journalism focus outlets, but I'm talking about the Fox and the CNNs. A lot of their reporting is sensationalized for numbers. Of course, we know it entertains. But again, I think that just taking a time out across the board and say, listen, this is really what the issue is, and how can we come to a means to have a ceasefire?
So what do the students want to gain out of this? Is it, I hear them talk about divestiture of investments in countries that do business with Israel and so forth. Yeah. I mean, is that really effective?
No, it's not. And really, I mean, this is not apartheid, right? Apartheid was hundreds of years implementation of Jim Crow in South Africa, from the white South Africans up against the native black South Africans. And out of that, of course, we get Nelson Mandela and many other leaders that fought against that for years. Really what you want is a ceasefire. You want the killing to stop. That's really what you want. Killing to stop, a negotiation for those that are kidnapped to be released and returned to their families safely. That's really what you want. If you're looking for blood, 2,800 to 28,000, you got it, right? Wow. At this point, you really want the ability to hopefully go back to normal. But I don't think there is a normal to go back to, because Iran popped one over at Israel, and Israel popped one back at Iran. And everybody said, you know what?
I thought about you when that happened, actually, because of the conversations that we've had in the past about how the Middle East was going to be kind of the epicenter for the creation of another world war.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I thought about that.
And Iran would be the center of that because they are the supporters of a lot of individual resistance. Some say resistance, others say terrorist groups, in that area against Israel. So, there you go.
So in Virginia, Virginia Tech, VCU, CNU, ODU, George Mason, UVA, University of Mary, Washington, all have had protests on campus. I don't see any HBCUs on there.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I will say, I'll say that you won't, I'm not saying that there won't be any, right?
Okay.
All right. So, again, we still got the fall semester, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But right now, I think that when things start to reach a boiling point, I think you'll see more of that protest on all campuses. So far. So, and then also, I was talking with someone out of New York a little while ago, and they were like, "Why aren't black students speaking up for Israel?" In this situation, and I said, "Listen."
I thought that too, though, in terms of because we do know that Jewish people also marched during the civil rights and so forth.
Exactly. And this is what I told my colleague in New York. I said, listen, African Americans and Jewish Americans have a connection and have worked together over many years, have stood up for each other. Jewish Americans for African Americans and African Americans for Jewish Americans. I said, here in the United States, there is no connection to the country of Israel and Jewish people and African Americans, right? Just like there's no connection between when I say no connection, but there is the connection is not as strong as relates to African Americans and other countries in Africa, outside of the West Africa, and also white Americans, and saying, hey, stand up for people in Africa. Right? Because again, it's over years we become part of this country. So if there were actions taken against Jewish Americans, I believe that African Americans would definitely stand. But you're talking about Israel, in a country that has thousands of years of history. A lot of people don't understand the regathering of Israel, 1948. The letter that came from at that time in England. And then, of course, the United States, supporting them in the 1960s in their war, and, of course, the 1980s, and then even before that, you talk about, the destruction of the temple and so forth, and how Jews were basically pushed out of Israel, for 2,000 years before trying to regather, and how they went up to northern Europe. So that's why you have Jewish individuals in Europe who are Jewish heritage, because they lost their land out of that war 2,000 years ago. So again, when you talk about Israel, that's a different conversation. But Jewish Americans and African Americans, yes, have a much stronger alliance in history and even today.
So I think it's Saturday is the anniversary of what happened in Kent State,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. What do you see as the
which is also a lot of commencement speeches as well?
Yes, exactly. The treatment from police in this instance today in 2024 versus what happened back then.
The
And
tre-
we can remind people what happened at Kent State.
Right, and you mean the treatment of police?
The treaty with the protesters. So in other words, how they're utilizing police on campus. Yeah.
Right. So of course in Kent State, there were a lot of protests taking place. Let's not forget about Jackson State.
Yes, Jackson
Let's not
State
forget
too.
about Southern University, what took place there as well. But what happened in that particular instance is that you had protests that were taking place. The campus police couldn't really contain them. So they called in, of course, the police, state troopers, and the National Guard was called in. Of course, they were throwing things to them, and somebody said fire. And then, of course, you get this firing that rings out from the National Guard. And then all of a sudden, you have, I think, 5 or 7 students that were shot and then they're killed. So Kent State is, and Jackson State the same way, and Southern University. You know, those are reminders of us, to us, of what takes place when you bring in National Guard, when you bring in, now again, the police themselves, you know, there's more of a local connection, relationship wise. And unless somebody's shooting you back there, you know, I believe you're not going to see them shooting. However, you know, when you bring in the Army, when you bring in the military, that changes the dynamics of everything, right? So it could become a very volatile situation very quickly. And of course, you know, again, Kent State, Jackson State, Southern, that all serves as a reminder to us of how military power is utilized on our own soil with our own military against our own people. So moving forward, what do we see today? The question is, will National Guard be utilized today? I believe that in more conservative states, we have conservative governors. I believe that you definitely will see a high possibility, especially if there's a lot more property destruction and a lot more calls for universities that are looked upon as being liberal, because you see the Republicans on the Congress saying these liberal presidents need to be, you know, stepped down and need to be eliminated, and they should be ashamed of themselves for allowing these students to protest. But I believe you'll see a lot more use, probably high probability of use of the National Guard, and also a push to show strength, right, against quote unquote the liberal students, the liberal faction of the country.
So, Eric, where's the line then between protests, because our country is built on protest,
absolutely, and war,
and war, exactly, and the call for, you know, things to be dismantled and the interruption of university life. Where's that line?
And well, it is a very delicate line, right? Now, of course, I believe, well, one thing we do have in our country is our freedoms, and the first one is freedom of speech, right? Freedom to assemble, peacefully assemble. So when you have that, you know, and of course, there's an article you just showed me from the Washington Post that the House passed an anti-Semitism bill over complaints from First Amendment advocates. But what happens is that when peaceful assembly turns violent, then of course there's no more First Amendment right for that, which I agree. I agree. A lot of persons agree. Destruction of property, you know, threat of life, and so forth. You can't have that. However, being able to protest, being able to have your encampments, you know, being able to speak, you know, from a bullhorn, hold signs and things of that nature, without impeding traffic, without impeding individuals from going to class, you know, I believe it should be part of our culture.
So Columbia said, you know, the encampment on their campus took over. It was utilized. It was not being the proper use of that space. Is that?
Well, that's
again, you were talking about, you know, being on the sidewalk and all of that. But if you're on campus,
well, you know,
it seems like their hands are tied. But are they really?
Well, I mean, when you try to please both sides, of course your hands are tied because you're being pulled to the left and the right, proverbially and literally. Yeah. But you know, again, that comes down to a policy play, right? But I think if universities are smart, you allow the ability for students to protest. advise that this area is for protest. This area is for if you want to have any camp, that type of thing. It also becomes a liability issue as well. And then you can't intimidate, your students, because universities are created to educate, and you can't intimidate the individuals that are paying to be educated. Now, from the GOP side, that's what they're saying. Oh, stop these protests. However, these are the same individuals that called, January 6th, J6ers, patriots that intimidated, right, and killed some people, police officers up in Washington. These are the same individuals that sign off on voter protection by private citizens, intimidating voters to come to the polls. So you have hypocrisy at its highest level. But again, our memories are short. But, we got to understand that, the pendulum swings both ways.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about world politics with Dr. Eric Claville and his award-winning Claville Report. So where are we? Let's go back to the Middle East for just a second. With the negotiations, I know that there's negotiations going on where they're trying to get hostages released. And there are American hostages as well as Israeli hostages.
Absolutely.
Where do you think the discussions are, and is that a possibility? Will there be a ceasefire?
Again, I hope there is a ceasefire, but I think I think you'll get some ceasefire here and there. First of all, I'll talk about the life of individuals, because that's more important than anything, the lives that we have and the time that we utilize it for. So for the safe return of all individuals who are still alive, and even those that are not, the return of their bodies is of the utmost importance. And for the sake of them, I hope there is a ceasefire. For the sake of peace in that area of the country, of the world, I do hope there's a ceasefire, because if not, I believe that much more blood will be shed and more countries will be brought into this conflict. And I think it'll start to stretch the resources of countries, including the United States. Keep in mind, we just left 20 years out of Afghanistan. We're still over in the country of Iraq as well. How many soldiers' lives that we spent over there, for what ended up being, unfortunately, a false invasion, of those countries. So with that, for the sake of all of that, I hope there is a ceasefire. Will there be one? I don't think so, because the other part of it is we got an election coming up. Now, we haven't talked about the former President Trump and our current.
We'll get there.
But this actually plays in his favor, because what happens now is that if the voters, and college students are a huge portion of Democratic vote, if there's discontent and they're not happy and they're not going to the polls to vote in November, because of what they perceive as a lack of action. And I believe, for me, I believe the lack of guidance and leadership from that bully pulpit that you have, being the president, I believe that's going to impact numbers to a point where it's going to be very close again.
So
unnecessarily close.
Wow. So where do you think the trial then, and will the trial that the former president is currently undergoing?
Which one?
The one that he's currently undergoing in New York, because it seems like the other trials may not start before the election actually happens. Is that going to have an impact? Do you think, whatever the outcome is, whether he's found guilty or not guilty, will that have an impact on him being president? And it still boggles the mind that we have someone who is being charged criminally, but also on the ballot to lead the country.
Yeah. So to your point, it's not going to hurt him at all with his voters. Matter of fact, it bolsters him even more so, because he's looked like he's being under attack. But not him, but actually the people he represents. They're attacking me because they can't attack you. He's positioned himself to be a surrogate, for them on a lot of these issues. But will it impact his chances to be elected? The answer is no. Guilty or innocent.
Wow. So let's talk about Biden for a minute, because there's this narrative, and I know you've heard it over and over, about how black men are disillusioned with the Democratic Party, that they're going to set sit out the 2024 election. I was listening to an interview the other night with Bakari Sellers, who was saying he is looking for Biden to speak to issues that are of importance to Black men, and it's not happening. And then we in our production meeting this morning, we were talking about the fact that apparently Biden has gained some points or shaved off some points from Trump, but it's with elderly people or older people as opposed to younger folk. What line does he have to walk, or what does he need to do to make sure that he can get people to the polls?
Well, he's got to, of course, there was an article I saw in Morehouse. They're saying he's got to engage, African-American voters, men voters, sooner, and the answer is that I agree. I believe that when you take a look at what has taken place with Black Lives Matter, post-Black Lives Matter, a lot of great issues have been addressed because of that. A lot of great issues with women issues have been addressed because of that. A lot of great issues with Black women issues have been addressed. And
Give some examples.
Well,
for example.
Right. Maternal health care, for Black women. Also women in general in the workplace and Black women in the workplace, and so forth. So in diversity, equity, and inclusion issues as well. With all of that, right? With all of that has been addressed, Black men feel that there's nothing that they've been dealing with have been addressed at all. And what really started this movement of equity is a Black man being killed by the police. And the George Floyd, crime bill pretty much died, right? Yeah. So, it died like George Floyd, a slow death for the most part. So when you take a look at what Black men are experiencing, they're saying, hey, we're left out over here. Now, for the most part, when you take a look at women being educated and also women voters across the board, both white women and Black women, that on both sides, that's your largest pool of voters that are now in some places now, but also that are growing, right? So from a political standpoint, and from a political standpoint, you want to go toward the voters that's growing, because it's all about quantity of voters, not quality, right? This is where quality does not matter. But
you just need the numbers.
Plus one. 50 plus one out of 100, you win, right? So, but what ends up happening now, but Black men have always been the backbone of a lot of these movements, a lot of the voting, a lot of the power broking and things of that nature. Well, men in general, but Black men in the Black community, when you look at, the civil rights leaders, when you look at business leaders and owners and so forth. But for the most part, Black men they feel they're being left out.
So what are some of the issues then that they would want to see addressed?
Well, first of all, you want to see address equity issues just like Black women in the workplace. Now, of course,
so somebody will say, well, if we get it for one, we get it for all.
Well, you get it for those that's not getting it, right? So if you're already getting it, just enjoy your piece of the pie. But these individuals have no pie, or their pie is being taken from them a little bit at a time. That type of issue. Also, Black health. Right? Black men and Black health. And not just Black health as it relates to health care, but also Black health as it relates to mental health, as it relates to the pressures in the community, and the attack of Black health as it relates to racism, right? There are a lot of things that are set up in our communities that's set up for us not to really win, right? Yeah. So creating, being honest about those things. And addressing it and saying, hey, we want to set the community up to win. And when we talk about the family as well, Black men and being the heads of their family, addressing those issues also.
So where do you think I guess here's my question, because it still baffles me. We talk a lot about how the far right is a smaller group of people. They're not really the majority, and so forth. So where are the rest of us in terms of all these things we keep seeing happening? I mean, Arizona last night overturned, thank goodness, the Civil War law, about abortion. But all these other things are happening in the country that seem to be going more towards the ultra conservative side now, because I wouldn't even say conservative. So if they're in the minority, why is the majority allowing this to happen?
Yeah. So to your point, the reason why it's happening is it's a game of chess, not checkers. I've said it before. Republicans in that group play chess, the long game, whereas Democrats or liberals play checkers, the short game. And when you talk about why things are headed the way they are, it's about, how the system works, the policy piece, the things that I delve into, it's the devil in the details, when, one great example I like to bring out is when Brown versus Board decision was ruled upon. Everybody was excited, the end of segregation, but somebody said, let's look at that word deliberate. What is deliberate speed? Because it's almost like an oxymoron, right? Where you say speed, you think of going faster, but deliberate is actually an intentional slowing of that speed. So it's like, yeah, you can run, but there's a rope behind you and you're wondering why you're not moving. And that's how politics is as it relates to policy. Those mechanisms that say, oh, yes, you can appeal your case, but then there are some hoops you have to jump through. You have some things that you have to do, some time delays, some other mechanism that you have to meet variables. And it becomes a slowing down of that process. And for those that are playing checkers, you want to go fast. But for chess players, it is the ability to understand, the ability to wait, the ability to make the right move at the right time, even if that move is delayed.
Because they've been at this for a very long time.
40 years, Mitch McConnell, when there was one justice that was declined in their hearing, he made it a position of himself at that point to stack the Supreme Court, to take the Supreme Court back for the most part. And he did. I mean, it was a masterful job, that he did. So that's his legacy. And that court's there. That conservative court is there to stay for a long time. And their decisions are going to make an impact, for a very long time.
Where do you think the Supreme Court is going to land on Trump's
immunity?
Immunity, yeah.
I think they're going to give him some immunity as it relates to certain things, but I think blanket immunity, no. That would be unconscionable if that happens, and it just doesn't make any common sense or legal sense. No one is immune from anything that they do, no matter what position that they hold. However, there are some things that you are immune from acting within the legal boundaries when you hold a certain office. So, because you're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes, right? President Bush said, weapons of mass destruction. He was like, well, you know what? And then he came back and said, you know what? Oops. But we're going to stay. We're going to stay over here. So he made a mistake, and that was a lot of people were killed because of that mistake. But because he was in his operating under his legal powers as commander-in-chief, he was not being criminally prosecuted because of that. So that's an example of that. But when you want to do what Nixon did, when you want to commit a crime, while you're in office, you can't do that. So that's the reason why he had to step down. If he did not step down, he definitely would have come under scrutiny, prosecuted because of that, and possibly even impeached.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene says that she is going to pull the trigger next week and vote to force a vote to remove Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House. Yeah. So there are two different ways that this could go, correct? Is that right?
Absolutely.
In terms of whether it actually hits the floor and then so forth. So give us the update on that.
Yeah, well,
she fascinates me because I just don't understand.
That's the word you use, fascinate? I say absolutely insane. Just absolute insanity. It is a circus that's hard to watch because it's a disaster. Those individuals, those individuals who are part of that faction of the Republican Party have basically stalled the work of government.
Yes.
To almost just unconscionable, historical. This.
I'm trying to find, there's a section in here, I'm looking for it now, that talks about specifically why she's mad. And, she said because he worked with Democrats to pass the budget so the government could stay open.
Yeah.
What?
Well, again, it's a precedent that was set first when Kevin McCarthy was impeached, and they saw that didn't work out too well. So now she's bringing this up, and they're saying no. Look, the Republican Party doesn't want this to happen. There are some people even in the Freedom Caucus that don't want this to happen. But for her to do it, it's just one of those things that she's being spiteful in doing.
Yeah, she says, Democrats funded the government in late March. They pushed past far-right concerns over government surveillance reauthorization bill and sending $61 billion to aid Ukraine as part of the $95 billion foreign aid package. But these are things that the government is supposed to be doing, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so what do you think will happen next week?
I think there's a deal that may be in the works where he won't be impeached. I mean, Mike, he's doing a good job as relates to the process, getting things done. They're going to probably the Democrats are going to save him. They're probably going to save him. But there's going to be some negotiation behind the scenes. This is going to cost you something. It could have happened with Kevin McCarthy, but it kind of fell a little bit. And I think the Democrats, from a political standpoint, wanted the Republicans in the country to see how inefficient they are, ineffective. Mm-hmm. And they had that mud on their face, right? You'll never remove that mud. It's in history, it's in stone. How you capitalize on that mud in that moment, I think is what's happening now. So I think that's going to be the way that it's going to go.
Eric, how do we get the Democratic Party, then, to use your analogy of chess and checkers, getting them to graduate to checkers? Because to chess. Yeah. Because it seems like that long game has much more impact ultimately on what's happening.
It does. Well, two things. One, I think you should do a speed chess, right? And in some instance, and the reason why I say that is because the Conservative Party, Republican Party represents a lot of America where that basically America was set up and works for them, right? Whereas the Democratic Party is made up of a lot of factions that are, America doesn't work or wasn't set up to work for them. So there's a lot of minority groups, right? So chess, immediate relief is needed in a lot of those areas, a lot of those communities. Mm-hmm. Whereas chess would not work because you need immediate needs. So in part, you have to meet the immediate need of your constituents in order to stay in office, right? To have power. However, behind the scenes, I believe chess is best because you work the policy side and you stack the deck in the agencies, right? Where now you change policy within agencies. And the court system, the federal court system is so important. Oh my gosh, it's so important. It's very quiet. Nobody says anything. It just keeps moving, keeps churning, but it's the federal court system that really controls. It's the ultimate, rock, paper, scissors, right? It's the ultimate rock. It's the ultimate rock that crushes the scissors. And paper, covers it sometimes, but it crushes the scissors, and it's the big bully. It's the big check in the background.
So do you envision, if we're looking down past or into the future, so here's your crystal ball, okay. because I think of it like South Africa in the sense of apartheid, because the minority ruled the majority there. If things don't change, or as you see things progressing now, could that happen here?
No.
Why not?
Because the system is so entrenched in power of groups that have run power for so long. It's impossible for a minority group that doesn't understand that power structure, that's never been involved in that power structure, to actually take advantage of it. It's kind of like a military coup, that fights and wants to run things, and all of a sudden you get there and you're like, wait a minute, what do I do here?
Right.
There's a lot that goes into running this country. There's a lot that goes into in this country playing a major part in the world. Now, in certain areas, right, where you have the political side of a community that a minority group becomes control of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to what we have here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You have minority individuals or minority groups, African Americans, that sit and control some of the very important seats in state government.
Mm-hmm.
But state government has many tentacles. So you're the face, and there are things that you can do. However, at the same time, you have to work within the system for the system to work for the people.
So we only have a little bit more time left.
We didn't get one call, right?
Yeah, how about that? Because the people are listening. What about let's bring it local or closer to home in the General Assembly. Some of the things that worked and some of the things that didn't. I was just kind of looking at the number of vetoes that the governor sent out. I mean, is that normal? And
No.
I didn't think so. But and did people get what they needed out of our General Assembly this year?
Well, I think the governor was very calculated in not vetoing the budget, but gave 233 budget amendments, which is in effect vetoing the budget for a lot of things. I believe that the contentious part was the arena deal that wasn't a deal, but a handshake agreement that kind of fell, but it fell flat. I think it was also another unfortunate for the governor, his agenda, another black eye up on some of the initiative he wanted, along with the Republicans not keeping the House and taking the Senate so that they can consolidate power during the last 2 years of his term. With that being the case, you now have the General Assembly that has passed a lot of bills that really are for the people. And Barbara, I think to the point that I spoke to earlier, the Commonwealth really saw and really entrusted the people that they felt that would work for them, and that's the Democratic Party at this particular point. I mentioned earlier, I've done some analysis on this on other shows, where we looked at the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and the record number of African Americans elected to office. If you look at Northern Virginia, a lot of African Americans elected there were elected in non-majority black districts, but majority minority districts, right? So what that tells you is that across the board, people see the job that African Americans in general are doing in state government, and they trust them to work on behalf of them for the people. So it definitely shows that government is, when you talk about for the people, by the people, the people, I think the Commonwealth, especially in this last legislative election, really shows how that works in practice.
So the leadership, very strong from Hampton Roads.
Yes. The center of political power.
Absolutely. So when did that switch happen, and how? This is why it's happening. But what is it about this group that has been able to take over and to be effective leaders?
Well, it's several things. Number one, longevity, the long game. A lot of positions in government, whether it be here state or federal, it's about seniority. So we have a lot of senior individuals that have been public servants a long time, and it's their time. But even with seniority doesn't mean that you can be effective, but they're effective not just because of seniority, but because of the work that they did prior to being the senior members in their groups. So because of the work that they've done, both in their community and then also laws on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth, I think that is the other factor that comes into play, where people say, hey, we can trust these individuals. And what the messaging that, and the work that they've done in this past legislative session and the messaging around it plays a huge part in communicating to the people what's done for them. And then lastly, I would say the continuity and the trust within the group that's here. I talk about Bobby Scott a lot. He's my congressman. I think he's the smartest congressman on the Hill, but he's at everything.
Yes, he is.
There. I mean, who does that? That's community focus. I talk about my good friend Cliff Hayes, Delegate Hayes. He's chair of the Hampton Roads Caucus. I talk about, of course, Don Scott, Louise Lucas, many others that have represented. And then the new blood in Virginia Beach, the 3 African-American males with Senator Rouse, of course, Delegate Askew, and Delegate Michael Fagans that are there in the community. And then the 3 women that are in Norfolk with Senator Angela Williams Graves, Delegate Benita Anthony, Delegate Jackie Glass, and then, of course, Phil Hernandez, first Hispanic elected to the House of Delegates out of Norfolk. So when you talk about, these individuals, when you talk about the center of political power, it's just not about position, but it's about the people and the focus on policy that's going to uplift them and not enrich their pockets.
Got you. So Senator Rouse announced this week he's going to run for lieutenant governor. Also, the mayor of Richmond pulled out of the governor's race and now is running for lieutenant governor.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, I think for the most part, LeVar Stoney, Mayor Stoney, saw the writing on the wall as relates to the numbers. And, of course, in politics is being able to leverage your relationships and go for sometimes the low-hanging fruit. But from a political calculation, this is me. I believe that LeVar reached too high too soon. I always thought that he should have declared for lieutenant governor first. And I thought, and then there's no way that I think Senator Aaron Rouse would have been even had the ability to contest him. But now I believe that because of the support that Senator Rouse has, especially in Hampton Roads, and I think you're looking at some very strong competition in that particular race. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to get real nasty real quick.
Wow.
But again, it'll flesh itself out. And listen.
But Eric, I mean, and I know we only got like 2 minutes left, but it looks like with Senator Rouse also, isn't that kind of fast for him to be reaching for lieutenant governor? He just got into becoming a senator.
Well, he's been a public servant for 6 years now, from the city council to now the Senate. He also has a good community base, with his foundation, Rouse's House in this area. I think he's moving at a rate, and you can do this if you position yourself in a good light, like President Obama. He was only in Senate for a couple of years until he declared, run for president, and there you go. But I think you move as fast as your stock rises, right? And I think that at this point he has a good name, a good look. Now, but the higher you rise, the more people can look under your skirt. So, we'll see what happens.
Good point. 1 minute. What do people need to keep an eye on?
Keep an eye on what's happening in the Middle East. We've talked about it on this show. I think it's going to play a major part in what's happening here domestically, also across the world. People are going to start to draw lines. But do your research and listen to the messaging. Don't believe everything you hear, but make sure you pay attention to things that are happening, especially on WHRV with Barbara Hamley, Another View. And to go out, and if you're not registered to vote, register to vote.
Please register to vote. Yes, absolutely. By the way, you made a prediction a couple years ago on a presidential prediction. Are you ready to make that prediction yet?
I will make that prediction when I come back in this summer after the primaries, which is only just a formality. Yeah. But I'll make it after the primaries.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Eric. It's always a pleasure to have you on. That's Dr. Eric Claville. He is a political and legal analyst, and among other things that he does.
Thank God for it.
Absolutely. And audience, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Another View. Now, you can listen to this show again or any Another View program by visiting our website, anotherviewradio.org. And you can also find us on Spotify or anywhere you go for your podcast listening pleasure. Next week on Another View, it's the Another View Roundtable coming up on Mother's Day. So I'm sure we're going to have some interesting conversation about where we are in this day and time as women. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham would have answered our phones if anybody called. I'm Barbara Hamley. Thanks so much for listening. And let's get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.